The sophisticated and articulate boxing gentleman of the 19th century had come to the realisation that boxing must change or be left in the past. Bare-knuckle fighting was illegal, and the last world title fight saw both fighters behind bars. Change was on the horizon. An equally intelligent, educated man had burst onto the scene. As they say, when the messenger is needed, the messenger will arrive. Gentleman James J. Corbett was like no champion before him. He learnt his trade well, was lightning fast with hands and feet. Corbett balked, weaved and slipped under punches. He fought behind a straight left, followed by a quick straight right to head and stomach. He invented the left hook and used as much psychology as ringcraft. Corbett had movie star looks and performed on both stage and screen. He believed in himself and backed himself to the hilt. James was a bank clerk with managerial potential, but resigned from the bank to fight the seasoned veteran Joe Joinski. On the train to the fight, Corbett bumped into his ex-boss, who hadn't realised that James had even left his job. He inquired why James was not at work. James replied, "Sir, the next time I come into your bank, I'll be putting money into it and getting interest from you." And with excitement in his voice, he told his ex-champ he would be making his future as a pugilist. "I'm heading to New Orleans to fight Joe Joinski, and after whipping him, I'm going to take on the great John L. Sullivan." The manager was speechless. His mouth fell open, wide enough to stick his safe in it, but James believed every word he had said. 3 days later, he cleaned up Joinski in a brilliant display of boxing over 27 rounds. Corbett's manager placed the result in the paper with the caption, "James J. Corbett, World Boxing Champion," and underneath it, "Put that under your hat." And some did, including Jack Kilrain's manager. He saw the article and said, "I say, Jake, here's some easy money. Let's take his money and give him a hiding." When they met face to face, Jack Kilrain had a smile from ear to ear. "How heavy are you, son?" with a tone of superiority. "Heavy enough to do the job," quipped James. "I'm 190 pounds. He lied. James stepped towards the scale, with lead weights tied around his ankles and in his pants pocket. Corbett needed backers, and he knew if he was too light, they would run a mile. They stayed and signed the necessary documents. Corbett stepped back off the scales. One of the weights slipped off his ankle. James stood his ground until the conversation dried up, then retrieved the giveaway weight unnoticed. Corbett knew that Kilrain had fought the great John L. and went 79 rounds, but that did not perturb him at all. Corbett gave Kilrain a humiliating boxing lesson, making him miss by a country mile, landing 4 or 5 punches in a row, then skedaddling out of harm's way. He cleaned up all around and got the first train out of town, with body and wallet intact. Corbett now had his eye on the Black Prince, Peter Jackson. Many historians rate him as the greatest of them all. Most top fighters dodged Jackson like the Black Plague, including John L. Sullivan, but not Corbett. He knew if he beat Jackson, he would get a title shot at Sullivan's belt. He challenged the Black Prince for $10,000. He jumped at it. The fight went for 61 rounds. Then the ref jumped out of the ring and consulted with the ringside officials. For the ref knew that they had had their money on Jackson to win the fight, and he could see that Corbett was taking control of it, and they were about to lose their not-so-hard-earned money. The ref stopped the fight and said, "All bets are off." The crowd went ballistic. The news of this fight hit the world's sporting headlines, with most fighters acknowledging Corbett as a winner and the certainty to fight Sullivan for the title. After the battle, Corbett, to lick his wounds, went to the comfort of a nearby steam room. He had no sooner closed the door when the door squeezed open and a figure walked in and sat beside James. You could not see your hand in front of your face. The steam was so thick. The fellow started moaning into himself with a deep grovelling sound from his soul. "You, sir, sound like a dying man. What's your problem?" inquired James. Lo and behold, it was Peter Jackson. He said, "I died 3 hours ago, sir. I've come here to this sauna to come back from the dead." Corbett recognised his voice at once. He placed his hand on his shoulder and shook it. "You, Mr. Jackson, are the greatest fighter I've ever seen, and I'm glad I fought you at the end of your career and not the beginning." John L. Sullivan knew Corbett was chasing him for his championship belt. So John L. placed an ad in the paper, challenging and verbally abusing the 3 top contenders. That he would fight them if they were game to step in the ring with him for $10,000 each, thinking they could not raise the money. But James Corbett turned up with weights in pants pocket and backers in hand. John L. Sullivan underestimated James J. Corbett, calling him a foolish fancy Dan, and I'll give him a lesson he'll not forget. The fight took place in New Orleans, 1892, at the famous Pelican Club on September 5, 6 and 7th, a 3-day bonanza for boxing with 3 world titles up for grabs. This was to be the first time boxing gloves were used for a heavyweight title fight. The Queensbury Wolves were here to stay. It was a 2-day train ride for Corbett to get to New Orleans. James had organised one of the carriages to be set up as a gymnasium, with hanging bag and room to skip rope, much to the delight of the passengers. While Sullivan was on the town buying drinks for anyone who would listen to how he would finish off Corbett. It was a hot, muggy evening. Rain had just saturated the ground, and sawdust was thrown in the ring to assist the fighters. As the men slipped through the ropes to go to their corners, Corbett had finally got his man where he wanted him, in the ring. No longer was he the gentleman. He abused Sullivan with words that infuriated him so much that when the bell rang, Sullivan charged like a raging bull at Corbett. But Corbett was swift on his feet and light as a bird and danced around like no fighter before him. On that night, they say Corbett was like a ghost. Sullivan said after the fight, you could not put a hand on him. As the fight progressed, the crowd grew quiet. They did not want to believe that this man Corbett could do what he said he would do and make Sullivan look like an old man. John L. Sullivan never gave up trying, but he was cut to ribbons. Only a dying tiger remained. In the 21st round, John L. Sullivan took the final count of 10. The crowd now cheered for a new champion, as they do. But in the boxing arena that night of September the 7th, 1892, there was a silent minority whose hearts were broken. Many tears were shed for an old champion who'd seen better days. 3 minutes after the fight, Sullivan walked unassisted to the ropes and raised his hands to the crowd. "Gentlemen," he said in a bold voice, "it's the old story of an old man against a young fellow. There are grey hairs in my head. I should have known better. I'm glad the championship of boxing stays in America. James J. Corbett is your new world champion. Honour him. Thanks for the memories. I remain your personal friend, John L. Sullivan. This is Billy Graham. Over but not out. Round 3 coming up."
Then I had